Ratatouille may seem like an innocent movie that excels at making fans hungry for complicated French dishes, but it's actually much darker than that. Chef Gusteau left behind a legacy that Anton Ego compared to that of the Chef Boyardee mascot. Those are harsh words coming from a food critic, especially when they're speaking about someone who had recently passed away. Oddly enough, that might not be the worst thing Anton did involving Gusteau. According to an interesting fan theory, there may have been more to the chef's death than Pixar originally let on, and there's a decent chance that the infamous food critic was directly involved. In Pixar's Ratatouille, the world accepted that Gusteau died from a heart attack, but some viewers have speculated that the renowned chef was actually the victim of a heinous murder rather than his own poor health choices. And if that's true, then there is a very dastardly character within the midst of the movies who is simply skirted by the audience, undetected by the authorities. Now, for those who haven't seen the movie in a couple of years and need a brief refresher, Chef Auguste Gusteau was an extremely talented chef, known for his 5-star restaurant as well as his book, Anyone Can Cook. Gusteau was all the rage in the culinary world within the Pixar universe. However, he was quickly dethroned when he crossed paths with Anton Ego. Ego, the aggressively harsh food critic, wrote the only bad review that Gusteau's restaurant ever received. However, it was such a bad review that the chef ended up losing one of his stars. The demotion from a 5-star restaurant to a 4-star one took apparent toll on the chef, and according to the characters in the movie, it's believed that Gusteau died from a heart attack, broken by Ego's review. However, that seems like a bit of an overreaction to a bad review, and some fans have speculated that there was actually foul play involved, which might turn Gusteau's tragic death into a homicide. Gusteau may have been proud of his restaurant, but it's doubtful that one bad review and losing a star would cause his heart to give out. It's not like this was a where the red fern grows type of scenario. It was something that he easily could have come back from, which makes it seem unlikely that the sadness would cause his heart to just give out on him like that. Now, in this case, it really looks like there was some other force involved. And believe it or not, it looks like that force might have been the very same food critic who caused the chef to lose a star from his restaurant in the first place. That's right, the speculation is that Anton Ego killed Gusteau, and he did so in a way that couldn't be traced back to him and simply looked like a natural death due to poor health and heartbreak. Now, you might be thinking that an infamous critic like Anton wouldn't have the motive to murder a chef like Gusteau, but that's where you might be wrong, because the movie practically spelled out his motive when they explained his relationship with Gusteau. In the end, it looks like it might have come down to nothing more than a difference of opinion. As mentioned before, in the movie, Gusteau was known for his restaurant as well as a book titled Anyone Can Cook. The chef came up with this title because it was something that he adamantly believed in. Gusteau felt as though you didn't need some pompous background or any sort of speciality to be able to cook amazing food, and that's something that everyone in the world should be able to get behind. However, that wasn't the case for Anton Ego, and his difference of opinion may have led the pair to clash to the point where Anton decided to get Gusteau out of the culinary industry for good. Throughout the movie, fans learned that Anton Ego adamantly rejected Gusteau's idea that anyone could cook, and considering the fact that Ego was the type of character to speak his mind, it's likely he argued with the chef about his belief. As a food critic, he probably didn't want new chefs stepping into the world of culinary arts if they were, in his mind, unworthy. So when a renowned 5-star chef starts telling the world that anyone can cook, Anton likely got upset at how that might affect his career. And though that's not the strongest motive for Anton to go out of his way to kill Gusteau, you never truly know the lengths that someone might go through to keep their career alive. Interestingly enough, there's another reason that Anton Ego may have wanted to kill Chef Gusteau, and it actually has to do with another popular Ratatouille fan theory. You see, instead of simply having differing opinions on whether or not anyone can cook, it seems that Anton may have gotten rid of Gusteau after discovering that he was a fraud. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and that seems to be true in the case of the chef and his son Linguini. You see, there's a popular fan theory that considers the idea that Gusteau, much like Linguini, was being controlled by a rat underneath his chef hat. And while you might think that's a crazy theory, there's actually some solid evidence straight from the movie which would mean that Gusteau was a fraud the entire time. That seems like something that a food critic like Anton Ego wouldn't be able to let slide, and might even have gone as far as to murder the chef over it. Now, throughout Ratatouille, there are two key moments that suggest Gusteau was being controlled by a rat when he was making his famous cuisine. The first occurred at the very beginning of the movie when magazine covers featuring Gusteau flashed across the screen. On one of those covers, it looks like the chef was hiding something underneath his hat that sort of looked like a rat. And on top of that, when they were trying to get a sample of the late chef's DNA to test against linguine, the hair that they used, which came out of Gusteau's chef's hat, supposedly came back as rodent hair. In other words, Auguste Gusteau definitely had a rat in his hat, which means he may have been a fraud the entire time. And again, for someone who took their job as seriously as Anton Ego did, this sort of fraud would be considered an unforgivable crime. A crime that, according to this theory, Ego couldn't let go and would end up killing over. Whether it was because of their disagreement or the fact that Gusteau may have been a fraud, the only thing left to figure out is how he made Gusteau's death look like an accident or a natural death. In Ratatouille, the world wholeheartedly accepted that the chef simply died of a heart attack after his restaurant was demoted. For Anton to pull that off means he had to figure out a way to make Gusteau's death look like a heart attack that he could somehow time with the release of his scathing review. Now, being a food critic, it was probably easy for Anton to set up a meeting with Gusteau at his restaurant under the guise of a critique, so it was easy for the critic to get close enough to the chef to murder him. And to do so, he likely used some sort of slow-acting poison, something he could put into the food, knowing that Gusteau likely couldn't pass up tasting his own dishes. Now, this is the Deluxe channel and not a CSI show, so there's no telling what sort of poison Ego would have used, but whatever the poison was, it would have needed to target the heart so that the coroner would claim death by heart attack. And with the world considering the timing of his heart attack in line with the demotion of his restaurant, it would have made sense for them to write it off as a natural death. That's why there was no investigation into the chef's death, and the food critic was able to get off scot-free, at least according to this theory. Interestingly enough, if this theory is true and Anton did kill Gusteau, then there's a chance that he ended up regretting his actions in the end after the chef's own son proved the food critic wrong. This guilt would have been enough to tear Anton to shreds mentally and cause him to help save Gusteau's son and promote a new restaurant in the process. If you remember how the movie ends, Anton tried the ratatouille that Remy made and discovered that he had just enjoyed food cooked by a rat. It was at that moment that Gusteau's words would have rang out in Anton's mind, telling him that anyone can cook. And in that moment, the food critic was likely overcome with the guilt that he felt for murdering Chef Gusteau and decided to change his views on the culinary industry. The movie shows how Ego went on to write a very positive review about the ratatouille that he ate and even gave credit to Remy. Of course, after praising food that was cooked by a rat, Anton ends up losing his job, which he likely knew would happen. He was willing to forfeit his job to prove that Gusteau was right when he claimed that anyone can cook, because Anton Ego couldn't bear the weight of the murder anymore. But simply admitting that he was wrong wasn't enough. Ratatouille ends with Remy explaining that Anton invested in Remy and Linguini and allowed them to open up a small bistro in town named La Ratatouille. And despite its small size, it had a massive reputation that saw a line around the block from open to close. In other words, if this theory is true, then the very same person who killed Linguini's father Gusteau helped him open a restaurant with his rat friend Remy out of sheer guilt. What do you think about this theory, though? Did Anton Ego kill Gusteau after the two clashed heads about what makes a good cook? Or was the acclaimed chef killed by having his heart broken like the movie implied? Be sure to let me know in the comments below.